Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We're up to Daf Daled in Shevuos, slowly chugging along, inching toward the end. Very exciting. We're up to Maskif lo Rabba Bar Ulo. Just a quick summary of the previous Amud, and what the question is going on is basically, in the last daf we had a halacha that Shevuos ha'edus, you're only chayav a korban if you refuse to give testimony on a monetary case. In other words, that because of your refusal, the toiveya lost money. It's a kfira on tvias mammon. That's what Shevuos ha'edus is, the parsha was is going on. So the Gemara wanted to know, how do we know that? How do we know that it's only a kfira on tvias mammon? So we had four different Tanoim with four different sources. We had Rabbi Eliezer, we had Rabbi Akiva, we had Rabbi Yossi Aglili, we had Rabbi Shimon, and each one had a different source. Rabbi Eliezer's source was from Oyin, right? There are two Oy's in the parsha of Shevuos ha'edus, and there are two Oy's by the parsha of Shevuos ha'pikadon, and just like Shevuos ha'pikadon is only tvias mammon, right? That's what a pikadon is by definition. You're denying mammon. So to Shevuos ha'edus, where it says Oy twice, is only a kfir on tvias mammon. Maskef la Rabba Bar Ulo. So Gor is going to challenge each pshat, starting with the first Rabbi Eliezer's pshat. Maskef la Rabba Bar Ulo. Oy, if you're going from a hekesh to Shevuos ha'pikadon from oy, bitoy yoichichu, Shevuos bitoy will prove shehen oyen. It also says oy by Shevuos bitoy, and yet, guess what? Shehen oyen v'yeshemo in Shevuos ve'inemo in koyen u'medaber shaloi b'tvias mammon, right? And it doesn't have a tvias mammon. Shevuos bitoy could be oichel loy oichel, right? It doesn't have to do with money. So maybe you compare it to Shevuos bitoy and say that just like Shevuos bitoy, it says oy twice in the parsha over there, it's even not on tvias mammon. So to Shevuos ha'edus is chayiv even on a kfira shaloi b'tvias mammon. So the Gemara says no. Mestabro me pikadon avadol meilaf. Would rather learn it from pikadon. In other words, I have an option to learn it from pikadon that says oy twice over there, and if I learn from pikadon, it's tvias mammon. I have an option to learn from bitoy, it says oy twice over there, and over there it's not tvias mammon. Which one do I choose? What to compare Shevuos ha'edus to pikadon or bitoy? So the Gemara mestabro me pikadon avadol meilaf. You know why? Shekain secheta. Because by pikadon it says v'nefesh kisechta mal mal bashem. And it says by Shevuos ha'edus v'nefesh kisechta v'shama kol Allah. The word sechta appears in both parshias. So Mamela, it sounds like there's a gzeir shava from sechta. Yeah? So here, Rabbi Kiva right away asks, 1 second. From Rashi, it sounds like there is a gzeir shava. Rabbi Eliezer resorts to a gzeir shava of sechta. Otherwise, you compare it to Shevuos bitoy. Asks Rabbi Kiva I don't understand. If you have a gzeir shava sechta, then why do I need oy? Divrei Rashi tzarchi and gadol. It's more over here, but taka kasha. So the Gemara says, Adarabbo, oh no, not so fast. You're telling me you have sechta, mebita avela lameila, if you should learn from Shevuos bitoy, shekein chatos, mechatos. Because there's a comparison, there's a common theme that applies, that is present by bitoy and by edus that pikadon doesn't have. A pikadon brings an asham, korban asham, chaimish and asham, and Shevuos pikadon, Shevuos ha'edus both bring the same korban as a chatos, korban oil v'yaretz. So the question is, compare it to a bitoy rather than pikadon. Because it's similar in four ways to pikadon. Edus is more similar to pikadon in these four ways. What does chet mean? Chet means the word sechta, like we just had. Bemezid, also, another aspect that they're similar to is because Shevuos pikadon and Shevuos ha'edus both are chayav korban on a mezid. We'll see later that there are only four places in the whole Torah where you bring a korban on a aveira b'mezid. And two of the four are Shevuos ha'pikadon and Shevuos ha'edus. The other is shifcha charufa, somebody who lives with a chatzi shifcha chatzi b'schayrin, and a nazir tameh. A nazir tameh, another that's metam himself b'mezid, also brings a korban. So there are only four places, and Shevuos HaEidus, Shevuos HaPikadon share that common denominator. And then Tavi v'Kafrei, a third way that Pikadon and Eidus are similar is it starts always with a tviyah, right? Somebody says, come give Eidus for me, or somebody says, you have my Pikadon, and then you're kaifer. That's the process. And Va'avrei, it's always about the past, the over. Where Shevuos Bitoy, right? Primarily the pasuk of Shevuos Bitoy is Lahabo, Lahara Lahetiv, and therefore you see in these four areas, Shevuos Eidus is more similar to Shevuos Pikadon, so we choose to compare it to Shevuos Pikadon, and therefore it's only by tviyas moment. So Gemara says, Adarabba, Bitoy Avla Melaf, still go to Bitoy, you know why? Shikain, Chatos, Shiyardo, Lachoimesh. It's similar in three ways. A, Chatos, which means that they both bring a Chatos as opposed to Pikadon, you bring an Asham. And Shiyarda means they both have a carbon oil of a Yared, right? It depends on your financial circumstances. Whereas by Pikadon, it's a carbon asham, which is shtei kesef. It's a portion of the Torah. It has to be worth a fixed amount, at least 2 silver coins. And lachaimish, and also it doesn't have chaimish, right? Bitoy and Eidus doesn't add a chaimish, no chaimish, and by Pikadon, you have to add a chaimish to the keren that you denied, that you lied about. So here you have also quite a few similarities between Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos Bitoy, so compare Eidus to Bitoy, and then you won't limit it to Tviyas Mammon only. So Gemara says, no, we'd rather still compare it to Pikadon, because Hanach Nefishim. Because there are more ways that Eidus, Shevuos Eidus, is similar to Shevuos Pikadon, if you count, right? Chet, Mezet, Tav, V'Kafir, V'Avri, which is 4, and by Bitoy it's only 3, Chatas, Yard, and Lochemish. Okay, so that is Rebbe Eliezer. Rebbe Kiva said, right, we learned it in the previous daf, his makar that Shevuos Eidus is only chayev by a kfira on a tviyas moment is because it says in the pasuk v'oik yeshem lachas me'ela sheyesh me'ela shu chayev yesh me'ela shu pater. It's not always, not on every tviyah that you're chayev a carbon of Shevuos Eidus. Only some me'ela, the men. So which one are you chayev on? Okay, it's a tvoi moment chayev, tvoi davar acher pater. Gemara says, whoa, okay, so once you know from me'ela that it's not all, only some, eipachano, how do you know that the chayiv on Tviyas Moment and Potter and everything else, say the opposite. Say you're chayiv on everything else except for Tviyas Moment. Says the more Mekiva Oy and Rabbi Eliezer Samach. Mekiva relies on the hekesh of Oy of Rabbi Eliezer to Shevuos Pikadon. More says, if he relies on that, my benayu. So what's the difference? He relies on Mekiva. But the Ikka benayu is a big difference. Mashbia Eidei Karka. We'll see later in the parak. It's not so pashut if Adam refused to give testimony on a real estate deal, right? On Karka, that there's a chiyuv carbon on refusing to give that kind of testimony. So the chiluk between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva would be whether mashbiya de karka, Rabbi Eliezer chayaven, Rabbi Kiva pturin. The Edom are koifer in tviyas moment, which pertains to karka. Rabbi Eliezer says there's still a chiyuv carbon for that. Rabbi Kiva says they're potter. Ask the Rabbi Yoel also mashbiya de karka. Feel Rabbi Eliezer pturin. They're not arguing in that sense. So hacha mai ikka ben Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Kiva. If Rabbi Kiva comes out to the oy like Rabbi Eliezer, so what is nafkamina lalacha between the two? As says Gemara, ikka benayu eidei knas. Eidei knas is a big nafkamina. We spoke about it. Question is, mashbiya made the knas. If Shevuos Eidus, they can shvur not to give testimony for somebody else who's trying to collect knas, kefel, chatzinezek, right? All those knasses the Mishnah talked about earlier. Rabbi Yosef Glili, Omer v'hu eidoi ra yada. Basically, they had a third makar for how I know that Edom are chayiv a korban only if they're koifer at Tviyas Mammon. They refused to give testimony on Tviyas Mammon. What was his makar? It says in the pasuk, it says in the parasha Shevuos Eidus, v'hu eid oy ra'a oy yada. He either saw it or he either knew. The only way you have any time in the Torah or in the world a testimony that can be niskayim, can be sustained with either a re'iyah alone or a yadiyah alone, which would fit the description of the pasuk of oyra or yada, that's only by moment. Omle Rav Papa Abaye Leima Rabbi Yosef Glili Lesta de Rabbi Acha. From this statement to Rabbi Yosef Glili, Rabbi Yosef Glili says that you have a case of yediyah b'lei re'iyah. Re'iyah b'lei yediyah, the Gemara talked about it on the previous daf, by moment, only by momentness. Asks the Gemara, from here you see basically does not hold of Rabbi Acha. Which Rabbi Acha? The Tanya, Rabbi Acha Omer. Rabbi Acha says, Gomel ha'oicher ben agmalim, v'nimtze gomel hareg b'tzidai, b'yedua shezeh haragai. So you see, a gomel is oicher ben agmalim. So what is Oicher ben Agmalim? Right, he is Zokok lenekeva, and anytime the gomel, a camel, wants to mate, so it's survival of the fittest. Right, they're fighting over who's going to mate with the nekeva, and the strongest wins. So if you see a gomel Oicher ben Agmalim, and you see a gomel is lying dead over there, then obviously the one who killed it was the gomel that won the fight. So now nobody actually saw this gomel kill. It's just circumstantial evidence. So Rabbi Acha says that you can actually be mechayev money, you can be moitzi mechaveroi with a raya of circumstantial evidence. You don't need Adam. You don't need somebody to have seen the actual hariga. So the Gemara says like this: the Isla Rabbi Acha, if Rabbi Yoel Gold holds like Rabbi Acha that circumstantial evidence is enough, then bedina nefesh is not mishkachas la. Then why does Rabbi Yoel Gold say that it's only by tvias mammon, only by mammon could you have a case of yediyah below re'iyah, right? Oyra, oyada. It's not true. By din nefesh you could also have a case of yediyah below re'iyah because circumstantial evidence is enough. So I didn't see the actual act of ritzicha, as we'll see in a moment. But even if I have proof without seeing it, that's yediyah below re'iyah. That should also be mechuyev Shevuos ha'edus. Okay, what's the case of din nefesh? Because Reb Shimon v'shatach. The Torah over Reb Shimon v'shatach. Ben Nechama im lo reisi echad sherotz acher chaver lechurva. Ben Nechama is a lashon Shevuos. Right? He makes a Shevuos that I saw somebody run after his friend into a churva. V'ratzti achav, I ran after him. Tzasi saiv b'yodai, I found a knife in his hand. V'dam ataftev harig mefarper, and it was blood dripping from the knife, and the harig was still shaking, convulsing. The body was still convulsing. Amarti loy, I said to him, Rasha, you evil person, who killed him? I know it's either me or you. We're the only ones here. I know it's you. It wasn't me. I can't kill you. That the Nakash bit him, poisoned him, and he died. But what do you see from here? See from here that there's a case by the Nefashis where you can have circumstantial evidence, and if Reb Yoel Gold would hold a Rabbi Acha, you can rely on circumstantial evidence, then you would have Shevuos ha'edus, a case of Shevuos ha'edus, even by the Nefashis, not just by moment. So he can't hold like Rabbi Acha that circumstantial evidence helps. No, he could hold like Rabbi Acha. Bishlam yediyah b'lei riyah mishkachas lo. You have oyoda, right? Yediyah alone, b'lei riyah, because circumstantial evidence. Elo riyah b'lei yediyah, the opposite of oyra, riyah alone, eich mishkachas lo. That you'll never have. You always have to know the person, right? You have to know, you have to have a idea of who he killed. It's not just a re'iyah, a random act of murder, but you don't know the details. You have to know the details as well. Why? Because the consequence, the einish, depends, it changes based on who you killed. If you killed an Ovid Kechavim, right, you potter maybe Mrs. Bezdin. You don't chayiv Mrs. Bezdin if you kill an Ovid Kechavim. So you'll never have a case of Re'iyah below Yediyah, and therefore it doesn't fit the description of the pasuk by Shevuos ha'edus of Oyra Oyada. Therefore, he can hold like Rabbi Acha, essentially that circumstantial evidence is enough, and you have a case of Yediyah below Re'iyah by Dinu Nefashis. But you won't have a case of Re'iyah below Yediyah, and therefore there's no Shevuos ha'edus in that. So the Gemara says, Shema Mina, at least I know from here, Shema Mina K'sov Rabbi Yoel Gold must be a Knas Potter. At least we know, we can deduce from here that Rabbi Yoel Gold does not hold that you're chayiv and Shevuos ha'edus if you refuse to give testimony on somebody else's behalf to collect knas. These are the daita chayiv, because if you say he's chayiv, nehidi yediyah below re'iyah ashkechan la, it's true that we can find a case of knas with yediyah below re'iyah, right? That's circumstantial evidence. But re'iyah below yediyah, the opposite, just seeing it without knowing what you saw, right? Exactly the details of who it was, miloi boya meida, that you'll never have. You have to know Nachris Bal, Bas Yisrael Bal, Basula Bal, Be'ula Bal, right? You have to know exactly who the person was. So you'll never have a case of Re'iyah below Yediyah, and therefore that cannot be included in the parsha of Shevuos ha'edus. So Knas is not included because it doesn't fit the description of Eira or Yodo. Because you can never have a case of Re'iyah below Yediyah. Because you can't be Mechayiv in Knas on that. You have to know the details before you mechayiv him. Gemara says, Yosef Rav Amnuna kamed Rav Yehuda, the Yosef Rav Yehuda v'kamaboyalei. So you have Rav Amnuna sitting in front of Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda asked Rav Amnuna the following shaila. Monem menesicha b'fnei pleni pleni. A guy says to his friend, I counted money, meaning I gave you money, balva, b'fnei plenty, in front of two people. The Eidim royen oisoy mebachutz. And Eidim are outside, right? They see through a glass bulletproof window, but they don't know what the context of the transaction is. They just see Reuven giving money to Shimon. What's the halacha mai? What is the halacha? Does he have to pay back or not? So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Amnuna. So Rav Amnuna said, V'halom matoyin. Tell me the whole story, right? Okay, so you gave me half the story. You told me that Edom saw, but they didn't hear exactly the details, whether it was Alva or Pikadin or Naveda. We don't know. Just he gave him back money. He gave him money. That's all they saw. But what's the gaita? What's the nitva taining? Where it says, I amar lahadam. If he says lo dvar ma'olam, it never happened. Uchza kafran. Right away, he's a liar. Why? Because they're Edom who saw. So once he's uchza kafran, then he's not neman b'shvua. And he omer en shakli v'di shakli. And if he's going to say yes, I took it, but I took mine, you also say to my havi, it's not going to help you because Edom can't clarify the context. They just said we saw the money going from Reuven's hand, from Reuven's pocket to Shimon's pocket, but they don't know exactly why he gave it to him. It could be that Reuven was paying Shimon back for a loan, not that Reuven was giving Shimon a loan. So Gemara says, Amalei Hamnuna, at all, you're the guy who's worthy of coming into the Besmedrish to learning with me because you make me wise, you make your Rebbe smarter. Keep on coming. Guy says to his friend, I lent you money by this pole, this pillar over here. See, this is the spot. Gives him the details of the location.
By this ladder,
Lamadala, this ladder. Wow, I love it. How can you forget that? Beautiful. Zichru says Lamadala, by this ladder. Okay. I never passed by this Amud. So go fly a kite. Also so then he brings two Edom and they're made the Hishton Mayim B'tzad Amadzeh. Yeah, that he washed up over here by this Amud and they're disproving his lie. He said, I never was in this Amud. And they said, we saw you here. Amar Shlakish Huchza Kafran. He is a Becheskas liar and therefore he has to, he's not Naaman to make a Shvua and he has to pay. What's the Maskal from Nachman? Hai Dina Parso. This is not a good psak. This is a secular law. This is a Persian psak din. Mika Amar Ma'olam. He never said, I never was in this Amud. He said, Be'esik Zek Amalei. It means, Mamish, in this transaction, in this, when you and I were talking, I was not there. But Avada, if it brings Edom Hishton, B'tzad Amud Zeh, 5 years ago, Avada, he's not, he never denied that, so he's not Uchza Kafran. Same thing. Here he adds, the Nitva says, no, I never was here. And then he brings Edom that he was Mashta and Mayim B'tzad Amadzeh. Amar Rav Nachman Huchza Kafran, there he is Huchza Kafran because he said, I never was here. Edom said they saw him once. Amar Rav Nachman, Rav said, no, even that is not Huchza Kafran. You know why? Because Kol Milsa, the Leiramya Alei de Inish Ovid Long, V'lavadate. Because anything that a person isn't responsible to really pay attention to, right? It's just by rote, he's just coming, going. Like he's not, how much does he notice already? So here, he's not really lying. He's not lying when he said I was never here because he believed or he didn't remember and therefore he's not Uchza Kafran on that. Yeah, Rashi says, a person doesn't have to remember every time and every place he's mashten, yeah? So it's not a lavadate. Says the Gemara Vayter, Reb Shimon Aimer. Reb Shimon was the one, right? That was the final source. Reb Shimon brought, how I know Shevuos Eidos is only when you're koifer Tvias Mammon. That's the only time you chai the carbon. Reb Shimon Aimer, Chiyuv Kan, v'Chiyuv Epikadon. There's a Chiyuv carbon by Shevuos Eidos, there's a Chiyuv carbon by Shevuos Epikadon. So just like by Kadin, it's like a Tzara Shava. Just like over there, it's Tvias Mammon, so to be Tvias Mammon. Then Reb Shimon was Mamshech. I have a Kavachaymer. And Reb Shimon had a Kavachaymer, Madach Pikadin, which is relevant to every single person, right? Anoshem, Noshem, Ksheir Psulam, Kroivim Rechoikim. And it's in any location. Bein Bifnei Bezin, Bein Shaloi Bifnei Bezin. You're Chayiv and Shvos Pikadin. And still the Torah limited it only to Kfiras Mammon. So Kolshkin Shvuos Ha'edus, where the Torah is limiting it even more, it's only Anoshim, not Noshim, it's only Rechokim, not Kroivim, it's only Ksherim, not Psulin, so certainly it would be limited in the sense that it's only by Tvias Moment. That was the Kalachim Reb Shimon had, but then he had a Pirch on it. And he said no, because Shvuos Ha'Pikadon is very different than Shvuos Ha'edus in two respects. One is, Shvuos Ha'Pikadon is only Mushba Mipi Atzmoi, and the Parashat Shvuos Ha'Pikadon is only Mushba Mipi Atzmoi, and Shvuos Ha'edus is even Mushba Mipi Acherim. And another chiluk, where you find the chumrah by Shevuos Ha'edus, where it's also mezid kashaygig. And Shevuos Ha'Pikadon, according to Reb Shimon at least, mezid is not kashaygig. Okay? So mamela you can't make the kavachomer, because even though you're right, Shevuos Ha'Pikadon is more expansive in the sense that it's applicable to everybody in every place, even outside of Bezdin, and therefore, and Shevuos Ha'edus is more limited, but still you see there's a chumrah by Shevuos Ha'edus that Shevuos Ha'Pikadon doesn't have, so maybe they can't make Kavachomer. Machka lo b'marova. So here, in Marova, in Eretz Yisrael, which is usually called Marova, it's Marova's Droimus Lebavel, right? So there, they laughed at Reb Shimon's Kavachomer and Pircha. I was going to try to say, what's so funny? Yeah. My chucha, what's so funny? The Ktani, says the Gemara, because the Reb Shimon had a pirch on his own kavachomer, because his malach because she came also by mushba kenishba, mezid kashoigig, right? Because Shevuos Ha'Pikadon doesn't have the din of mushba piacherim, and it doesn't have the din of mezid kashoigig michdi. Slow down. Mushba piatzma be'edus Reb Shimon and all. And how do I know by Shevuos Ha'edus that mushba piatzma is also chayiv? Right? If you voluntarily jump up and make a shvuah that I don't know edus for you, and nobody ever was teveya you. How do I know that there's a chiyuv there as well? The pasuk it's only mushbi acherim. How does Shimon know mushbi atzma is also chayiv? The gama and pikadon. Obviously, you're learning from pikadon, right? Pikadon, the parasha of Shevuos Ha'Pikadon is mushbi atzma. So once you're learning Shevuos Ha'edus from pikadon, it's pikadon nami mushbi acherim digma me'edus. So then learn also Shevuos Ha'Pikadon should teach too. Shevuos Ha'edus should teach Shevuos Ha'Pikadon. The Mushba Acherim applies over there as well. So that's why they laughed. You know why they laughed? Because Reb Shimon says that there's no halacha of Mushba Acherim by Pikadon. What do you mean? Of course there is. Just like you learn Mushba Atzmai from Pikadon to Edom, learn Edom to Pikadon, that Pikadon also has Mushba Acherim. So that was the mistake that B'marova, they detected this mistake in Reb Shimon's pircha on his own kavachomer. Kabbalah says, "Oh my chucha, what's so funny? Maybe Dilma, Reb Shimon b'kavachomer ma'asela. Maybe Reb Shimon never compared Pikadon to Edus, right? The svara mak Reb Shimon is because anyways we have to compare Pikadon to Edus, so compare it to Mushbi Acherim as well. But maybe Reb Shimon never compared it. And how does Reb Shimon know that b'Shevuos Ha'Edus you're chayiv on Mushba B'Pi Atzmai? He's not comparing it to Pikadon at all. How does he know it? Kavachomer ma'asela. B'Pi Acherim chayiv, if there's a halacha by Shevuos Ha'Edus, you chayiv B'Pi Acherim, because that's the parasha of Shevuos Ha'Edus. B'Pi Atzmai loy kashkan, avad you chayiv B'Pi Atzmai. He's not resorting to learning it from Shevuos Ha'Pikadon. He never compares the Shevuos Ha'Pikadon, and therefore there's no Mushba Acherim by Shevuos Ha'Pikadon, and that's why it's a good pircha, nothing to laugh at. Says the Gemara, l'chucha. No, you're right. That's not a reason to laugh. But Ella, chucha mezit kashaygig. The second part of the pircha of Reb Shimon was that Shevuos Ha'Pikadon is different, that it doesn't bring a carbon b'mezid. Mashenk and Shevuos Ha'Edus does, because mezid kashaygig by Shevuos Ha'Edus. Gemara's the Ktani, mala Pikadon shekain le'osa b'nishba k'nishba mezid kashaygig. Mechdi. 1 second, slow down. But Marova, they slowed this down. Mezid ga be'edus manole. How do we know by Shevuos Ha'Edus that it's unique in the sense that it brings a carbon on a mezid? You know I know? They're like siv be'vanela. Because it doesn't say the word vanilla. Vanilla means you have to be in a forgetful state. If it doesn't say vanilla, it means even on a mezid you're chayiv the carbon. Achanami, but Shevuos Ha'Pikadon, if that's the svara by Edus, that mezid is kashaygig, by Shevuos Ha'Pikadon, like siv vanilla also. It doesn't say vanilla by Shevuos Ha'Pikadon either. So how did Reb Shimon make a pircha and say, no, Pikadon is chayiv and mezid, Edus is not, and Edus is chayiv and a mezid, and Pikadon is not, for the same reason Edus is chayiv, because it doesn't say vanilla, and Pikadon should also be chayiv, doesn't say vanilla. Amlu Rav Huna, no, that's also not funny. And my chucha, it's not nothing to laugh at either. Dilma mezid the laugh kashaygig Pikadon. Me'ila Reb Shimon Gamarla. Maybe the reason why, it's true, it doesn't say vanilla on Pikadon. So maybe you should bring a carbon for a mezid as well, just like by Edus. But there is an outside limud that can teach us by Pikadon that you only bring on a shaygig, not on a mezid, even though it doesn't say vanilla. How so? Because it says B'Shevuos Apikadon the word of Mo'ala Mal B'Shem. Nefesh ki sechta Mo'ala Mal B'Shem v'kichas b'misay. And it says B'Me'ila B'Hegdish v'Nefesh ki Simol Mal. So the Lashon Me'ila appears in both parshias. And just like by Me'ilas Hegdish, it's only B'Shoigig, so to Shevuos Apikadon is only B'Shoigig. So therefore, it's nothing to laugh at, because by Pikadon, even though it's not an Elam, we learn Pikadon from Me'ila that you're only chayv in a shaygig, and that was Reb Shimon's pircha, because Shevuos Eidus is even chayv in a mezid. So the Gemara says, "V'hai nechucha." What do you mean? That is still a reason to laugh. You know why? Because at the Gomalam Me'ila, Nigmalam Eidus. So now you have Shevuos Apikadon in the middle. You can compare it to Eidus and say mezid kashaygig. You can compare it to Me'ila and say only shaygig. So compare it to Eidus and not Me'ila. The Gemara says, no, that's not a reason to laugh either, because Mistabra Me'ila, Reb Shimon had good reason to compare to Me'ila over Eidus. You know why? Shekain Me'ila Me'ila. Both parshis, it says the word Me'ila. Gemara says, Adarabba, Eidus have a little Me'ila also. Because Shekain Sechta Mesechta, because it has these two words in common by Pikadon and Eidus. Gemara says, no, still Mistabra Me'ila have a little Me'ila of Shekain, Me'ila Bakol, Nena Bekavua, Chaimish Va'asham. Still, Me'ila is more of a comparison to Pikadon because it's similar in 6 halachas, 6 ways it's similar. Wow, it's a lot of ways. Number 1 is Me'ila. The word Me'ila appears by both. Number 2, Bakoil. It's Negeya to women and men alike, right? Somebody's moil behektish, even a woman, she has to bring a carbon. Or somebody makes a Shevuos Pikadon, denying they ever got a Pikadon from somebody else falsely, then also Bakoil, it's for everybody. And Nehena is also, you have to have Nehena Ba'avera, right? You have to have at least some sort of hana from somebody else's mammon, holding on to somebody else's mammon Pikadon, and Be'ila Behekdesh has to be also a Shavapruta. And there has to be Bekavua. They both bring a Kavua to get carbon, right? Asham, unlike Pikadon and Eidus, which is a Eilav Yored. And there is both a Chaimash and Asham. Kavua means it's a fixed amount, and it's a Asham, it's carbon Asham, and a Chaimash. So you have all these similarities between Me'ila and Pikadon, and that's why Reb Shimon chose to compare Pikadon to Me'ila and say it's only by a Shaygig. Gemara says still, Adrabim Eidus have a Lamelef. Still compared to Eidos. Shekein Chet, Hedyot, B'Shavua, Tave V'Kafir V'Oyin. It has similarities as well. Quite a few similarities. Chet means a sechta. Hedyot, it's replying even to a hedyot, right? Me'ila is only Behekdish. B'Shavua, and they both talk about a Shavua. Me'ila Behekdish is not the word Shavua. Tave V'Kafre, the process is somebody's Taveh. Your Kaifir V'Oyin, and also the Oy's that appear by Pikadon and Eidos. So compare it to Eidos and say that it's Mezid Kashaygig. Says the Gemara, no, we'd rather compare it to Me'ila. Reb Shimon would compare it to Me'ila because Hanach Nefishin. There are more similarities between Pikadon and Me'ila than there are between Pikadon and Eidos. And therefore, Reb Shimon says that even though there's no vanilla by Pikadon, so it should also be by a Mezid, because no vanilla. So we compare it to Me'ila because Me'ila is only a Shaygig and it's very similar, much more similar to Me'ila than Eidos. So Elamai Chucha, so bottom line is, we can't figure out why b'marava they mocked Reb Shimon. They laughed at his pshat. Mai chucha. So the Gemara says, "Ki oser Rav Papa from the Rishuv they Rav Amri Hayna chucha." I'll tell you why. Michdi. Reb Shimon Gzeir Shava Gamer. Reb Shimon has a Gzeir Shava that compares Shevuos Apikadon to Shevuos Eidus. Right? It says sechta. So the Gemara says, once you have a Gzeir Shava, so Lomalei the Parich. Why is he asking on his Kavachomer, why is he asking that there's discrepancy, there's a difference between Pikadon and Eidos, that Pikadon doesn't have Mezid Keshaygig and doesn't have Mushba Piacherim, and Eidos does. Once you have Gzeir Shava, Avada Pikadon has it. You compare all the halachas. So Reb Shimon made a mistake. Gemara says, Amaychucha, really? Okay, slow down. What are they rushing to laugh? Delma Kiparich. Maybe the pircha Reb Shimon had on his Kavachomer was mikama to take him like Gzeir Shava before he realized there was a Gzeir Shava. But Baza to come like Gzeir Shava, loy parich. And Chanami, once he has the Gzeir Shava, he agrees that Pikadon is also Mezid Kashaygig, or it's also Mushba Piacherim. Gemara says, V'loi? No, even after the Gzeir Shava, Reb Shimon made this pircha. The Amalu Rav Baritel Rabbanan Man Tana Shevuos Pikadon, like Leinitin's Doina Lekapara. Who's the one who holds that Shevuos Pikadon doesn't bring a carbon b'mezid? Reb Shimoni. That's Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon still holds, even after the Gzeir Shava of Sechta, where you want to compare all the halachas of Eidos to Pikadon to Eidos, still Pikadon doesn't bring a carbon from mezid. And that's why they laughed. Why not? Of course it does. You have a Gzeir Shava. the Gemara says, Dilma mezid kashoigig parich. What do you mean? Maybe still there is a discrepancy with mezid kashoigig. The Gemara me'ila, but you just said, even though you have Gzeir Shava, but me'ila trumps the halacha of mezid kashoigig and says it's only by shoigig because it's similar to me'ila in all these ways, the anach nefishin, in all these many ways you just mentioned. Avol mushba kenishba loy parich. But after the Gzeir Shava, he didn't ask for mushba piacher because you have Gzeir Shava to compare it. So the Gemara says, so still you don't have a reason to laugh. Gemara says one final attempt to explain what was the chucha. Gemara says maybe they felt that still they should be at least equal in mezid the laf kashaygig. Why? Beseder eidos with sigmar la mepikadon. Once I know from me'ila to pikadon that you don't say mezid kashaygig, it's only on shaygig. Now the kasha is, so let pikadon through this Gzeir Shava influence the halacha by Shevuos eidos and say mezid laf kashaygig. Ma pikadon shaygig in mezid loy, because you learn from me'ila. Af eidos through the Gzeir Shava of sechta should teach you from pikadon shaygig again mezid loy. Keicha the alaf pikadon me'ila, because that's what we know from pikadon for. The Gemara says, no, that's not a reason to laugh either. You know why? Because la'achi katz v'rachmana la'edos gabe Shevuos bitu v'gabe tumas mikdash v'kadashav. That's why the Torah wrote by Shevuos eidos, Shevuos bitui. The Torah said the bekula never v'nelam. Torah says v'nelam, which means it's only when you're in a forgetful state when it's shaygig. V'kan lo nemer ben v'nelam l'chayiv ala mezid kashaygig. The reason why the Torah put them next to each other, right, the whole parsha of Eidos, Shevuos Bitui, and Pikadon, is to highlight the contrast between the Venelam of Bitui and Eidos to Pikadon where it doesn't appear. Right? Where it doesn't appear is to be Mechayiv. Sorry. Forget. Noch kaz rachmana le'edus gabe Shevuos bitu gabe tumas mikdash bekul lemer v'nelam. By Shevuos bitu you need v'nelam, tumas mikdash v'kadash you need v'nelam, but by edus you don't need v'nelam. It doesn't say v'nelam to be mechayev ala mezid kashaygig. So that's why you don't have the influence of pikadon teaching you on edus. Or you learn pikadon from me'ila that you only chayv on shaygig. So the Gemara's question was maybe they laughed because they wanted, once you know that from pikadon, so let sechta say by edus you also only are chayiv and a shaygig. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a reason because there is a contrast between Eidos and Shevuos Bitui, Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, where those, it says V'nelam by Tumas Mikdash Shevuos Bitui, it doesn't say V'nelam by Eidos, to teach you that by Eidos, Mezid is Keshaygig. So bottom line is, it seems, like according to Reb Shimon, right, we said earlier that there are 4 places in the Torah where you bring a carbon b'mezid, but Reb Shimon would argue on that. Reb Shimon says you only bring a carbon b'shoigig by Shevuos HaPikadon. Only 3 places in the Torah: Eidos, Nazir Shenitma, and also Shev Charufa. We'll get there in the future. Okay.